Tell us who you were before you went into the service. What were the circumstances which led to your entering the military?
Ralph, I was manager of a small radio station down in central Georgia at the time I received my draft notice, and we had an Army recruiter that came by to deliver the public service announcements, and we developed something of a relationship. And he came in one day and I said, "I've been drafted." And he said, "You know, you're going to go right to Vietnam with a gun in your hand. I can get you into officers candidate training school, and then you'll manage a radio station for the military." And I thought, well, I didn't really want to manage a station for the military because you don't have the dynamic of commercial advertising and that sort of thing. And I said, could I be on the air as an officer? Well, you couldn't do that. The enlisted people are on the air and do the news and that sort of thing. And as a manager of a small station, I signed on the station every day and did the news and that sort of thing. So I liked that aspect, wanted to keep my hands into it. And he said, well, if you commit for an extra year, I'll guarantee that you'll get in broadcasting. So based on that, I signed up for that extra year. And after basic training, I was surprised to get orders for advanced infantry training school. And they told me at the time when I went to see the commanding officer that all of the allocations were full in terms of broadcasters, and I would go to infantry training school, which I did. And so after that I was shipped over to Korea, tapped by the United Nations Honor Guard, the Army component of that, to be in the Guard. And these are the people that wear the shiny helmets and the spats and march in the parades, which I didn't want to do. And I wanted to work in the TV station on the hill there at Seoul. And so eventually I did, and did radio and television news. And then during that time I wanted to go over to Vietnam and see what that was like, and had applied, and it took, I even came back to the States. My next assignment was a missile base. And I spent 4 months there trying to get an assignment in Vietnam.
Was that still in Korea?
This was after I left Korea, okay, at the missile base, and they didn't need a broadcaster or an infantry person there. By that time, my MOS had changed to broadcasting, but after writing the Pentagon, finally, I did get an assignment in Vietnam, and I felt relatively sure that when I got over there, you know, I had by that time a broadcast MOS instead of the infantry MOS, which was secondary. And then, but when I did get to Vietnam, there was no guarantee. I'd written the AFVN, the American Forces Vietnam Network, asked them if they would consider me for an assignment there because I couldn't get a guarantee of that. So as soon as I got to Saigon, Tan Son Nhut Air Base, I took a taxi over to the station, applied for the job, got it, and went from there.
I'm curious about your request for going to Vietnam. Was it basically out of curiosity that you wanted to go?
As a civilian, of course, I'd read the news and was curious about Vietnam, and I thought if I'm in the Army, I'd love to go over and to see for myself what it was like. I didn't have an opinion either way in terms of the war. I didn't think it was a good idea that we were fighting another war and people were dying, but I wasn't absolutely sure in my own mind whether we were doing the right thing. It was only after I got there and had an opportunity to visit the field and talk to commanders and the Army personnel and military over there that I began to formulate an opinion that we had made a grave mistake a long time ago. Too bad about that. Now how do we get out of it?
Yeah, the difficulty was deciding how to extricate ourselves from what David Halberstam called the quagmire of Vietnam. You arrived in Saigon through Tan Son Nhut Air Base. Mm-hmm. What was it like? What was your first impressions when you got to this city in '69, which was considered the most densely populated city in the world, Tan Son Nhut, the busiest mm-hmm. airport in the world, including O'Hare International?
We flew in on a commercial plane, which here we are in our fatigues and our rifles and everything. We're flying into to Vietnam. I expected to look out the window and see Russian MiG planes, you know, ready to shoot us out of the sky. I had that kind of feeling about it. We landed at Tan Son Nhut, and then for miles, it seemed, there were rows and rows of these metal coffins, and that was kind of startling. I think the biggest morgue in the world was located at Tonsanute. And I could tell you a story about talking with people there and that sort of thing. But off the plane, of course, here I still had that infantry MOS, went through the processing there, didn't have permission to leave, but I caught the taxi and went into the city anyway because I wanted the job at the TV station. So I got out of the taxi. He wasn't quite sure about where the TV station was, and he dropped me off. And here I've got my M16 and in my duffel bag, and I'm walking through these streets, and I have my gun like I'm ready to shoot somebody, you know, if they're going to shoot at me. That's the kind of feeling I had about it. And they were looking at me rather strangely, and I was wondering, are these people all communist or what, you know? But yeah, I had a certain amount of fear as I made my way over to the TV station. And
so tell us about your job once you got the military occupational specialty at the TV station.
it was much like a civilian job. You know, the radio and television station there, the radio station played rock music and other kinds of music, of course, as well. And if you saw Good Morning Vietnam, it was much like that. We had a nice, very nice television and radio station. And the newsroom there was operated much like a large newsroom at a large TV station. Absent, of course, were the commercials. They did the public service announcements on, you know, stay out of the village and don't do this and don't do that, you know, and don't get involved in the black market and so on. And my job was much like it would be in a commercial station here. I went to work at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and immediately got briefed on what was going on, read all the wires, and we had Reuters and we had AP, UPI, and fed through us. And then we had Armed Forces Radio and Television Service, that audio that was fed into the station. And then we had from CBS News flown in every day from Hawaii. We had CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite, which was aired the night before in the States, and we had permission from CBS to use cuts from the Cronkite show, and then we also got footage from ABC. So we would put together our newscasts, and those would be our visuals for that. Of course, we had slides, and as I say, very much like a commercial TV station. Well, after I got caught up on what was going on in terms of the news of the day, I would start preparing my first newscast, which was, I think, was like at 4:30, and then we did one at 5 and 5:30. And then if I had to do a shot on the 6 o'clock TV news, then I'd get ready for that. But then I read radio news up until 10:30. And then by that, in the meantime, I was preparing for my 11 o'clock newscast on TV, which again was much like any newscast you'd see late at night with your news, weather, and sports. So we had it all, and we had our anchor desk and that sort of thing. And that basically was it. And then the newscast was over at 11:30, and I'd catch a ride home. And my home was a hotel in downtown Saigon. And coming to work, I'd take a Cicolo there, and generally a Cicolo back, or ride with one of the guys. We'd commandeer a truck or whatever. And
Cicolo being a three-wheeled motorcycle with a seat on front.
Yeah, and quite often without the motorcycle and a guy
just
pedaling.
Pedaling,
yes,
right? Yeah.
And I'd say Plaza Hotel, and they'd take me to the Plaza Hotel, which GIs lived there. We were leasing it for like $100,000 a month. A lot of things like that were going on that were rather overpriced, but we were paying the bill. And it had an American Chase Manhattan Bank down below. And
other than wearing a uniform, it was almost like a civilian job back here.
I would say so, absolutely. And then, and of course, during the day, I never wore a uniform. You know, I went out and played golf at the country club, and which had natural sand traps that were originally bomb craters.
I think there's a lot of Vietnam veterans who aren't aware that there were some of these amenities in the rear areas. Tennis courts, swimming pools, golf courses, that type of thing.
It was all there in Saigon, and it's too bad that some were lucky that they had that opportunity. We did, quite a few of the GIs did come in from up country or down country or whatever into Saigon on R&R or whatever, and could sample some of that. But it was like being in special forces with all of those amenities that any officer would have, even though I was a Spec 5.
You mentioned the movie Good Morning Vietnam, and it's about Adrian Cronauer, who was in the Air Force on loan to the Army in Saigon to be an announcer, a DJ. And the movie, one of the themes of the movie is how Adrian had to fight censorship. It was tightly controlled on what he could read. And so he kind of used a comedian's approach to sneaking these stories in. How factual is that?
It's very factual. It was the same when I arrived in country. Very strict in terms of what they wanted you to say, what you could say, what you could not say. They didn't want any kind of bad news on the air. Nothing about the protest in the United States. Nothing that a congressman or a senator said that was critical of the war. Nothing that was critical of our counterparts, the Vietnamese. I could give you some examples if you like.
Sure.
I told you we could use Walter Cronkite's cuts from his CBS News, and of course they had their bureau there in Saigon. And one particular piece was on the VNAF, the Vietnamese Air Force, and it told a very true story that these people were really unprepared. Even though they had intensive training from the United States, they weren't very good pilots, not all of them. And their ability to take over the war looked like it would not be too great. And so at any rate, this was one of the pieces. The Cronkite News was reviewed by the officer in charge of the newsroom and the NCO each day when it came in. And they would write off to the side of each piece. They'd put the time of it, they'd time it out and everything, what the content was, and then they'd put do not use if it were critical. And so this was one of those pieces. And those are the ones I naturally reviewed first to find out what it was. So I'd run the piece anyway. And they weren't too tight in terms of coming in, what have you got on your news tonight? Later they did, of course. But so I would run those pieces, and the next day when I came in, I'd be called into the officers' headquarters and chewed out for running that. Why did you do that? And don't you ever do that again? Well, I continued to do that, and of course these were professional people that were in the newsroom, and they were doing the same thing. We were putting the news on. They did have a way of blocking a certain amount of it out because our teletypes all came through MACOI, the Military Assistance Command Information Office out at Tan Son Nhut. And so they could scramble, which they often did. We'd go for days with the news wire scrambled. And I just listened to Armed Forces Radio and Television, write news from that. So you'd get the news they'd want you to get. And that was it. Senator John Young, I think he was from Ohio at the time, he was critical of a general who was continually going up Hamburger Hill. And I think that was a movie as well. And we were just losing hundreds of guys, and he was going to continue to do that. And Senator John Young said, well, he ought to be up in front if he's going to do that. Well, I ran that sound cut, and of course that was another piece they weren't too happy with. So it's that sort of thing, and
it's ironic that we were over there supposedly championing and fighting for democracy, and yet there was that strict control over information. Do you think that the military's rationale for controlling had to do with demoralization of the American GIs over there, or was there any other reason?
I think that's absolutely, there may have been other reasons, but I think that's one of them. The least amount of bad news that you can tell them, the better they felt. But they didn't realize, or I don't know why, you're thinking we're talking intelligent people here, but news filters through, letters came, they knew what was going on back home, and they could certainly listen to world radio in a foxhole over there. And so they were getting the other side of the story, and of course they realized the war was politicized by then, that we had gotten to the point where they could see the enemy and not shoot first, it was that sort of thing, and very restrictive. And so I think you're absolutely right. That was the key reason, the morale.
One of the things that the military did not exercise any control over was the U.S. mail. GIs could get Newsweek, Time magazine in their mail from back in the United States directly to them. So you're right, they could know what was going on in the U.S. as far as anti-war activities.
Sure.
And so when you compare that with what you read and hear in letters from your friends or family, and then you watch the news on AFVN, the Armed Forces, there's the big lie there.
Yeah.
It's funny that the military would still feel it was important to do that.
Yeah, it's incredible. I had a friend, Bob Lorenzen, who was CBS News producer over there. One night he said, I like the news, but you do so much foreign news of the world. And I said, that's about all that we have left, after you cut out the big story, which was Vietnam. Interesting thing, and this was an argument that we had there, and I say we, in the newsroom, the professionals in there, that the Defense Department policy on news was that everything is unfettered and unfiltered, and the GI is entitled to get the same news that he would at home. And so we operated on that premise, on that policy, which was fallacious. And so we certainly tried to circumvent them in every way we could to get the news out. Not that I had no feeling in terms of, as a newscaster, that I wanted to protest the war, change their minds or opinions. All I wanted to do is deliver the news. We had my roommate, who was my sportscaster on the late news, he one night went to the Catholic Cathedral downtown and marched in a parade and wore an armband and that sort of thing. And a couple of other guys did from the station, then other GIs too. But it wouldn't be something that I would do. Just didn't feel that was my role, and didn't participate. And on the air, as I said, my intent was, here's the news, do with it what you may.
How many, what percentage of stories would be totally killed as opposed to those which were maybe certain sentences lined out? Did they do that, or was it usually the entire story would be deleted?
We're talking the whole story would be deleted, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say, anything that was at the least bit critical. I remember at one point I did air a cut from Walter Cronkite that I'd gotten off the radio, and this is one of those times when they had scrambled the wires, and I was desperate for something. And so he was doing a piece, and it was very critical of President Tu, and talked about that Tu was really in political hot water in his own country because they were protesting by then, in the streets, and going to work every day became a hazard because they were firing tear gas grenades at you all the time. But anyway, I ran that story, and then in the next day's paper, President Tu's brother-in-law editorialized it, that the person responsible for that story ought to be hung, which is what they did over there, So anytime that we did air a story that was critical of the Vietnamese government or their operations in terms of being our counterpart, they would immediately send a courier down from the Blue House, from the presidential palace, to pick up that story. So.
I can remember in, I think it was November of 1969 when Ho Chi Minh died, and he ended, his image ended up as a Time magazine front cover. Mm-hmm. And there were a number of Vietnamese civilians who approached me and wanted me to go to the PX and buy them Time magazine because they wanted that cover. What the Thieu government had done is ban Time from the street corners. They actually burned piles of the Time magazine in the street. So the Thieu government confiscated that particular weekly edition of Time. But of course the GIs could buy it in the PX. They got it in the mail, through regular mail. I thought it was interesting that there were South Vietnamese citizens who still looked up to Ho Chi Minh as some figure of importance in their history, and were even taking a chance by being found in possession of one of his photographs.
Yeah, because I'd heard at the time that the penalty was death if you had a picture of Ho Chi Minh, and of course some South Vietnamese were communists as well, so that
Sure.
could have been their reverence for Ho Chi Minh, who was incidentally, had been an ally of ours back during World War II. But it's interesting that you mentioned that story. That was another do not use. The BBC did a great piece that Walter Cronkite ran on the Ho Chi Minh funeral, and I aired that, and that was one of those presidential palace, very upset, and me being called into the office about airing that piece, and then another death threat from President Thu's brother toward me for running that story.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's another one of those. During the summer of '69, I feel like it's a Bryan Adams song. The newsroom they started purging the newsroom of the professionals who were raising the issue of the censorship, and they were one of them they took off the air, and he did the war news, and they put him in the record library or something like that. The next war editor, we had a segment called the War News that we did at 6 o'clock, and we had a war editor that appeared on camera to do that. At 10 o'clock, or 11 o'clock, summarized all of that into my newscast. And these were rather tame stories about a ribbon cutting for a new, I was going to say a new boat. The Vietnamese Navy built a cement boat, and we sent a crew down to film it. And so the boat rolls down the ramp, and they had this great ceremony before that, and he christened it with a champagne bottle, and I think it was the president. And it rolled down the ramp and sunk. One of those do not use.
Wonder where the concrete would sink.
One of those type stories. I kind of lost my train of thought. Where were we?
Well, I'd like to tell a little story that affects you and me when we first met back in 1980. That when I came to Sioux City, you and I went to the first edition to have lunch and talk about internships at Channel 9, because you were news director at that time. And I found out that you served in Vietnam, and I asked you when, and you said 69 and 70, and I said, wow, that's when I was there. Where were you? And you said AFVN Studios in Saigon. And I couldn't believe that, because I was on, among other things, a quick reaction force, what they call QRF. Whenever there was an alert in Saigon, my unit was supposed to get into full battle gear and head directly to an objective. And our objective was to set up a perimeter at the TV and radio station, AFVN. So here you were inside working, and I was outside on a QRF squad as the objective of protecting that from any attack. And we never met until we got to Sioux City. I thought that was an interesting story.
Well, it's interesting that you said that about the quick reaction. Let me tell you how quick the reaction was on this. I talked about they were purging the newsroom of the professional people in there, and they were replacing them with people that had no involvement with news. In fact, the officer that took over the news department was a Marine Hull maintenance officer, and knew nothing about the news. So they would send these people in to work in the newsroom, who would follow orders and do exactly as they were told. And they'd send the news people out into the field somewhere, and they were gone. So I was one of the last left, and this was on January 3rd. I was sitting at my news desk. I typed up the 11 o'clock news. I was ready to go on the air, and all of this time, and I think it just built to this crescendo of what they were doing to the newsroom, and the fact that we weren't free to tell the truth, and all the good news people were just being scattered out and kicked out of there, and they were really taking control. I knew I was next, surely. And I was really surprised why they ever kept me on the air, because I was always defying them, always in trouble. And that rather puzzled me. But on the night of January 3rd, I said I finished up the newscast. I was sitting there, and I just started writing out this piece explaining this, that we weren't free to tell the truth and that sort of thing. At the end of it, I said, I'm probably going to be in a lot of trouble for this. Good night, and so long. Well, I wrote that up, and I handed it to Tom Sinkovitz, who was the sportscaster, and he was rather startled, you know. You're going to do this on the air? And I said, yeah, I've just really had it with these people. I'm going to do it. And so I had an appointment the next day at noon with Gary Shepard, who was a CBS correspondent. We were good friends over there. He's now with ABC out in Los Angeles. And I called Gary and I said, Gary, I'm not going to be able to keep my appointment tomorrow because I think I'm going to be in trouble with these people over the censorship issue. And he says, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm just going to talk about it at the end of the newscast, and we'll be in touch. Bye. Well, unbeknownst to me, I mean, Gary says news story, you know. So he calls his cameraman, and they set up to film right off the air. And I must tell you, quite frankly, I knew I was going to be in trouble for this, but I didn't know the reaction that there would be regarding this. And I certainly didn't realize the attention it would get from the world press. And as I say, they were all centered base right there in Saigon. So at the end of the newscast, it was Walter Cronkite interviewing Lyndon Johnson. I had run that piece at the end of the news, and came out of that just before throwing to sports. I said essentially that we were not free to tell the truth, and that sort of thing. And so I could see peripherally as I was looking into the camera, that the NCO in charge of the control room was walking around pulling his hair out. Of course, he was bald, but and they didn't know how to react. He didn't know whether he should unplug me, or because it would certainly prove that we do censor at AFVN, or what. But it was over in about 25 or 30 seconds, and so I said, threw it to Tom Sinkovitz, a sports person, and Tom said, "Thank you, Bob, in more ways than one." For that little statement, Tom also was arrested. Immediately as we left the studio, the officer in charge approached me and said, "The colonel will call, don't leave. You and Tom stay here." I went outside just to get some air, and a truckload of, maybe it was you guys, a quick reaction force, I think they were military police, that surrounded the compound. We were a fenced-in area. And I walked over there, and then these TV lights came on, and ABC and a couple of other crews were out there, and they interviewed me right through the bars, through the fence. So at any rate, later the colonel comes, and you know, the phone is ringing and people are going crazy, and so they want to know why I did this, and I explained, you know, because you guys make us censor the news, and I don't want to be part of it. So as a consequence of all of that, they filed court-martial charges against me. They thought about sending me to the Delta because I did have that secondary MOS as an infantry person, could shoot any weapon, you know. So, but because the press was on top of this story, which got tremendous attention, I have clippings that people sent me in Japanese,
I remember
you know,
that.
from all over the world, and it certainly got big play in this country, and then on the Cronkite News and NBC and so on. So that was rather a startling thing to me, to see that suddenly we were in the news and not just reading the news, and that was kind of a frightening experience. But at the end, after about a week or so, they got us out of Saigon. They sent Tom off, I think up toward Da Nang, and then they sent me to the Central Highlands, which, if you want me to point on the map up here, can you see where is the Central Highlands? Up in here. So beautiful area up near Kontum and Pleiku.
It's interesting that when you mentioned the quick reaction force, the real purpose of the QRF was when Saigon was under alert for a possible VC attack, that we went to the destination of the TV station because that would be a primary objective for the enemy to take control of. And yet the military could use the QRF for other reasons, keep you in the building, keep the press out of the building, that type of thing. So, yeah, when you're in the military, it's its own society. It's its own closed, controlled environment. And I can remember when GIs in Vietnam got in trouble with a superior officer or something, and a particular GI was worried about court-martial or something, getting chewed out. And there was a favorite saying that we would, to make us feel better, we would say, "What's he going to do? Send us to Vietnam?" We were already in Vietnam. That was hell.
Yeah, right.
We can't go any worse than that, except for LBJ, Long Binh Jail.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, you went up to play coup. What happened? Why did they took away your broadcast responsibility?
MOS. So they gave me my infantry MOS back, of course, and so I was prepared for that. But I think because of the world press was following this, the fact that they had charged me, that I had court-martial charges pending, that it would look better if I were not fighting in the Delta or whatever, or even up in the Central Highlands. So they assigned me to a chaplain up there, which was really great because he was a nice fellow who understood my plight and allowed me free access to his Jeep, and of course you could jump on a chopper, as you know, and fly anywhere you wanted to go, and then catch a plane. So I went to Saigon a number of times after that, and there was a congressional investigation, and we met with that congressional investigating team down in Saigon, which the upshot, they were really wined and dined by the military, of course, and they were saying out of 5,000 news stories, X% is censored. I never saw the final report, but the upshot was that there was really no censorship in Vietnam, so that was kind of a closed case. But in terms of the court-martial, I did meet the two-corps commander, flew around with him. We went into some hot LZs, and we had an opportunity to chat. It was his responsibility. They had transferred the court-martial to him, whether he wanted to continue with it, which he didn't, and he dropped the charges, and that burden was off my shoulders. But I do say this, that it was a good experience being up there in the highlands, being out in the field, really getting a feeling for what was going on, and to meet those mountain people, which are just beautiful. I love the people down in Saigon. I thought they were just wonderful people, and some of the nicest I'd ever met. And then the mountain tribes people were just beautiful, and it was like going back in time when you really went back into the sticks, so to speak. And you don't have to go far out of Saigon to be in the sticks, but up there in the mountains where the women would wear these gold and silver rings all the way up to there. I mean, it was just incredible that here it was just like stepping back hundreds of years into time.
When you finished your tour in Vietnam, was that the end of your 3-year stint in the military, or did you come back to the States and finish out?
I went we're from Saigon to Oakland and out, and I was out.
Yeah, when I left Vietnam, it was the same thing. I left Saigon, and within 24 hours, landed in Seattle, Tacoma, at the airport. And there wasn't any kind of debriefing or psychological study or anything done with the troops that were coming home. It was pretty much, would you like to re-enlist? Sign here. Otherwise, have a good life. Is that the way it was?
Yeah, that was the way. That was the way it was essentially for us, and certainly I had no intention of re-upping into that sort of thing. But I'll say this: in terms of the Army, it was a great experience, and beyond that whole mess with the censorship, I met a lot of nice people, and there were some fine officers and enlisted men, and it was okay.
Bob, you've done something that I had always hoped and may still do since I left Vietnam in 1970, and you returned to Vietnam, I believe, in 1986.
Yeah, it was 88 I went back.
88, okay. Tell me what led up to your decision to go back.
Well, I always wanted to go back, like yourself. You want to go back, and what is it like today? And, it was such an interesting period. And I have a friend who works for CBS, correspondent Rick Frederickson Bangkok, Thailand, and Rick worked. He did the war news in Saigon on the TV station. He went to the 5 o'clock follies every day that they had, where the military briefed the press on how many enemy they killed that day, and they called it follies because everybody knew it was all lies. You know, you weren't telling the truth about the body count, that sort of thing. So at any rate, Rick, who's from Des Moines, worked at KCCI. He was their anchor for about 8 years, and then he went from there to Hawaii, and then he got the bureau job at CBS in Bangkok. And Rick had been after me to come over and said, look, you stay in Bangkok and fly right out of here over to Vietnam, and I can help make all the arrangements. So I decided I'd do that. But and so I made a commitment. I was gone for almost 3 months. And so I'm still a practicing journalist, so I was able to sell enough story ideas. Des Moines Register, I had written for them about 3 years, you know, all across the paper, but primarily for the business page. And so they commissioned me to do a few articles for them and a few other magazines, so I financed the trip that way. And went to Bangkok, and then took Air France over to Saigon. And this was like, what, help me, the 20th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, or something like that. It was some kind of anniversary coming up there. Maybe it was Tet, I can't recall, but a lot of journalists were going in at the time.
Oh yeah, that would be Tet if it was 88, because
yes, okay.
Saigon fell in 75, so, but Tet was 68, so
Okay,
that was
so
20-year anniversary of Tet Offensive.
So, and so as I said, a lot of journalists were going in to cover that story, and coincidental with that, they were starting to let some tourists into Vietnam, and not a lot of them were going over there. So I went and I stayed in the Continental Hotel, or the Caravel, which was CBS, and I think AP had their office in NBC there at the time during the war, and it looked just like it did, 20 years ago, just older. And that was my impression as I came in from Tan Son Nhut. When I landed there, you could see remnants of the war, sandbag gun emplacements, that sort of thing, some burned helicopters and jet planes and that sort of thing around the periphery. And then as I drove into Saigon, I had a guide that met me at the airport and in a car, and we drove in, and as I drove in, I just said, this looks the same. It just looks older, and that's the way it was. And of course, the people, the Vietnamese people, when we were there, it was a bustling town,
yeah.
and there was some wealth in Saigon, and but that was absent, and very sad. So I was in there for a little over a week, and then spent a week up in Hanoi, and had a very good trip.
Mm-hmm. What type of things did you see when you were over there, or did you want to see again?
Well, one of the first things I wanted to do was to go back to the TV station, but they would not allow me to do that. Didn't tell me why. But I did. They have a museum over there where they've captured, of all the American weapons, they captured tanks and planes and mortars and everything. And so they had these little signs in front of the tank or whatever, and it would say, captured from the imperialist American aggressors and that sort of thing. And that was, and it was that kind of tone on the little placards they'd have alongside the weapons all around this old general's house is what they used. And then they had one room full of pictures of atrocities allegedly committed by the Americans, like My Lai. And so I thought, if they want to attract American tourists, especially the GI, they ought to clean that act up a bit, because it was rather offensive, I thought. I went over on the way to work on that Cicolo to the TV station every day. I used to, right down the street, we'd come up Embassy Row past the American Embassy, and which is quite a structure, and then down the street was the Presidential Palace at the end of the street. And had a gate around it, and big gun turrets and helicopter pads and helicopters in waiting, to fly the president out of there. Always wanted to go in there, and this time I had a personal tour through that. It was very opulent, decorated in the 60s motif, of course, but you could see why a Vietnamese peasant would not be happy to see his tax dollars being spent on that palace. But today they use it as a conference hall.
Outside of Saigon in former South Vietnam, what were some of the other sites that you visited?
I went to the Mekong Delta and went down, saw a lot of old sunken boats along there, and went and visited some a little island over there where they have a little village, and they were all very friendly. And I must say, the Vietnamese, they want to see us back over there, and they're very happy to see me, because the only white people they had seen were Russians or East Germans, very few former GIs. I went to Cu Chi, and they had the tunnels there where the Viet Cong had this tremendous infrastructure of tunnels running all over, and all over near the gates of Saigon. Mm-hmm. And so had an opportunity to see that, and how these the Vietnamese had lived in these tunnels, and they had their little rooms with their kitchens underground, and little round circular tunnels that would connect for miles and miles. Mm-hmm. And that's how they could move through country and create a lot of havoc, and plant landmines and shoot mortars and get out of the way before we could find out where they were. They'd go underground. Let me say this, that talking about the gates of Saigon, while I was over there, one of the things that I did, of course, was interview the Vietnamese officials, and I visited the Saigon newspaper, and the Daily Saigon, I forget what they call it, but met with the editor, who was a war correspondent, who was, before Saigon even fell in 75, wasn't it? He was right at the gates, had assembled his staff, and they were writing the story on the fall of Saigon. And the next day, of course, just moved right into the newsroom at the existing newspaper and started printing. And so they were all around. And of course, you wouldn't know a Vietnamese communist from a Vietnamese Democrat. Mm-hmm. You know, they looked absolutely the same. So they blended in with the society, but they were very well prepared for the takeover before they got there.
In '88, when you were there, did you were Russian soldiers, civilians in evidence?
Mm-hmm.
They
yes, were. Soldiers in civilian clothes. They were advisors and that sort of thing. The East Germans had their people over there as well.
Did the airport, the air base, Tan Son Nhut, did it look anything like it did when Americans were over there? Were there a lot of military planes or Russian bombers? Or?
Well, yeah, they were. They had Russian equipment. So, and of course, they had confiscated a certain amount of hours. They were still flying, and so yeah, it looked very much like the same, but just a lot older, not as spiffy as it was when our military had it in there, and it was a first class situation in the way they did things.
With the breakup of the Soviet Union and other countries, Japan and France, England, reestablishing contact and diplomatic relations with Vietnam. The United States is kind of the holdout country. Mm-hmm. What do you think of that? Do you think that with this many years that have passed by since 1975, that anything's accomplished by continuing this non-diplomatic status with the Vietnamese?
Let me preface that with this. As I said, I interviewed the communist officials over there, and they're economists, and one of them was Harvard educated and had been in this country many times. And they were very frank. I thought it was interesting in Saigon and then in Hanoi when I was up there interviewing the ministers up there about communism not only being a failure worldwide, but also a failure in Vietnam. Here the communist officials are saying, you know, it isn't working. We realize that we've got to have, we've got to give farmers and businesses an incentive. We've got to give them something. We've got to start operating more like capitalists. And so they were very much into a reform mode. And Italy was there, France was there, Australia was there. It seems like everyone was there, but the American presence in terms of working with the Vietnamese, in terms of seeing how we can exploit the many resources, including oil they have in that country, and get them some hard currency, because they're still doing it. They were bartering, everything that they made. They had to give to the Russians or to the East Germans in order to get any kind of cash at all. So they desperately need that American presence over there. Of course, with the embargo, we control everything. Our allies really don't want to go in there with a big presence and do the kind of things that they could do, risk offending us. But I would say this, that I think it's a good time to normalize relations, if anything, for the people in South Vietnam that were our allies and our good friends. I just had that feeling so much. It was really sad to see them so unhappy and under this burden of a very poor economy. And I think if that can be lifted and things can get moving back in terms of business and manufacturing and exploration, that the economy improves, their life improves, and I think we've done a good thing. So I think after all these years. I wanted to say one thing about, there was an interesting thing. There's a park right near downtown. I went through there one day because the Amerasians, the children of American servicemen, were all over the place and quite evident. I thought it was the kids next door running up to me. Hundreds of them. It was incredible. And here they were, part American, fighting to get out of there, going through that tremendous amount of paperwork you have to do to get out of there. That was sad, to see these kids. They looked like the little American kid next door, and you just wanted to grab them up and bring them home, And,
Sure.
And I think part of that normalization of relations is you could solve, they brought a lot of those kids out, but there's still quite a few over there, and I think it would heal a lot of wounds. It would help those people in the southern part. And that's it's a good country and good. Those are smart people. You were there, you know that yourself, and they have a lot of patience, and love to see something. Maybe they have to have a restriction. That was interesting about the MIAs. Everybody said, well, they've got to account for our MIAs, and so I raised that question with the war minister up in Hanoi, and he says, ourselves, we have over 300,000 MIAs. We can't even find our own people. Right. And so they want us to find 2,000 Americans or whatever. While I was there, I don't know how many people would come up to me and want to take me to show me some bones of MIAs, and they'd have copies of dog tags they would give me, and of course I turned all of this stuff over to the American Embassy and the MIA office over in Bangkok, where we operate out of. And
when you think about it, it probably really isn't the responsibility of a former enemy country to account for MIAs of their enemy. And I don't think there's any precedent for that, and yet that has become such an important reason that our government uses for not establishing normal relations. And of course, the sad thing is that the families of MIAs that are almost like being kicked around between one and the other bureaucracy, not being able to finally put to rest their loved one.
Isn't there a suspicion about, I think it all revolves around the suspicion that they're still holding live Americans over there. But it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. That's a big country. You look at the map there, and it's it's easy for anybody to get lost. And after all these years,
when I was in Saigon at headquarters, one of our responsibilities was administration of the military police detachment, the American, and so we had access to all the records in Saigon. And there were a number, I don't know what the actual figure was because we were not told to assemble those figures, but there were quite a few GIs who went AWOL in country. In other words, GIs who were totally fed up with the war and in some way became enamored, which isn't unusual, with the culture, Vietnam culture, took off their uniforms and disappeared in country. And we had detachments that always had them as like a wanted poster. If you see this American, he's AWOL. And again, they were part of the MIA. MIA is a generic term simply meaning if you don't have any physical proof of a missing soldier, then they are automatically MIA. They could be POW, they could be voluntary AWOLs, they could be killed upon impact and nothing found of the body, particularly in aircraft. So there's many different ways that a soldier can disappear, and yet they become an MIA. And I think the emotional side to that has been, in order to keep that hatred for Vietnam active, is to use that 2,000 some figure. And in the minds of most Americans, the minute they see that, they're thinking, geez, 2,000 men who are prisoners of war. We have no evidence that they are all prisoners of war. Yeah, and would they still be alive today? That's the key, if they were.
You know, you hear, I recently heard a report where there was they had gone over with their investigating team, and some Vietnamese had sighted an American or a Caucasian in some little village or somewhere. And I've often thought, you mentioned going AWOL, and it reminds me, we had a fellow that worked in our newsroom named Cecil Lane, who went AWOL and was never heard from again. And he could be one of those guys that still could be over there, because there are some that, interesting, in Thailand, there are quite a few old Army people, Air Force people, military people scattered around that country that love that existence, you know.
Sure.
And who just de-roast right out and ended up in Thailand.
With 2 trips to Vietnam now, one is in the military in the service and one as a civilian, have you written anything about it, or are you putting it down on paper or thinking about it?
What I've written for publication, I wrote for the Des Moines Register, and but over the years I've written about it, and it's one of those continuing sagas. You know, I've never finished it. And,
sure.
Hopefully one of these days I will. I've often thought. In fact, I did. Houghton Mifflin, I believe it was, had sent me a letter right after this story broke, asking me if I would write a book, and of course I wrote them back and said I'm not in a position to do it at this time. And I often thought, well, I'd go back and write that book for them, but I've never completed it.
Were you free to take photographs on your travels in Vietnam?
Yeah, in fact, I wanted to bring them. I think I told you I'm remodeling my house and we can't find a thing. But yes, there were certain things that I couldn't take pictures of. Like the TV station was one. You know, why in the world? You couldn't even see much through the compound. But I took my camera and took at will. They always had someone follow me, and it was interesting when I was up in Hanoi. This guy, I knew he was following me because I'd make a turn and there he would be, and he would follow me. And I had gone over to interview the Australian ambassador about the economic situation, about whether Americans ought to normalize relations and come into the picture. And so I got lost on going back to the hotel, and so there that guy was, and I just waved at him, and I did like this, you know, which way, and he pointed.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, so that was funny.
Do you have plans for another return trip?
I have. When I went over, I wanted to go back up to Pleiku and Kon Tum and to the highlands because I fell in love with that area up there and the people, but it was off limits for some reason they had. Now Rick over in Bangkok tells me I can go up there, and so he's anxious to make the arrangements, and if I can get some irons out of the fire, I'd like to go back over the first of the year and not spend 3 months, but maybe a couple of weeks in country.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's been very enjoyable hearing about your experiences in Vietnam. I'm Ralph Swain, and this is the Vietnam Experience. Good.